Gotten the go ahead. We can get started now. Thank you all so much for joining us on behalf of Mental Health America, American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and SEAT, in conjunction with the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, the Congressional Black Caucus, and the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus. I just want to welcome everyone today to our briefing on minority youth mental health. My name is Joanna Rosen. I am stepping in today for Ayan Moladina from SEAT, who deserves all the credit for organizing and planning this event. Unfortunately, he was called away for a family emergency, so you're stuck with me. I'm just going to try to do him justice and move this all along for you. We're really excited to get started with this opportunity to discuss and explore and learn about ways to improve mental health care access, mental health support for minority youth who face these struggles every day, and hear from our youth advocates who have so graciously donated their time to join us today. I'm going to first introduce some recorded remarks from one of our congressional champions, Representative Maxwell Frost from Florida. This is the first member of Gen Z to be elected to Congress, and he is a member of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus and chair of its youth task force. So I'll turn it over to his recording.
Hi, Frost here, and thank you so much for joining us today. I just want to thank everyone who took part in organizing this very important briefing on mental health, especially as it relates to young Americans. We need to do a lot more in this country to make sure that we're expanding both the quality of care, but also the amount of people who are able to receive mental health benefits in this country. And not just that, but making sure that we do it in a culturally competent way. And that's something that hasn't necessarily been integrated into the full mental health apparatus across this country. And we're talking about a generation that has been disproportionately impacted by every issue under the sun. I oftentimes refer to Gen Z as the mass shooting generation. It's because when I go to high schools, middle schools, and even elementary schools in my district, students tell me that they feel like they go through more active shooter drills than fire drills that are traumatizing them. They're going on their phone every day, seeing trauma around the world and here in this country, and this stuff builds up. And not every community, and I say this as someone coming from especially a Latino community, is equipped to help handle the mental health crisis of our young people. And so we need our government to do a better job of making sure that we have resources for everybody, especially as it relates to young Black men. So we got a lot of work to do. Thank you so much for being here to make sure that you all have the information you need to make sure your offices are advocating in the most appropriate way. Thank you so much.
And now we're going to hear some remarks from Representative Bonnie Watson Coleman of New Jersey. She has long been a leader in the minority mental health space and the youth mental health space, and she's a member of the
Hello, everyone.
She's a member of the Congressional Black Caucus and the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus.
I'm Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman, and I represent New Jersey's 12th District. In 2019, I chaired the Congressional Black Caucus's Emergency Task Force on Black Youth Suicide and Mental Health. We convened the task force because Black children, some as young as 5 to 12 years old, were taking their own lives at astonishing rates. Between 2007 and 2020, the suicide rate among Black youth ages 10 to 17 increased by 144%. And from 2018 to 2022, the suicide rate among Black youth ages 10 to 19 increased by 54%, while at the same time, the rate among their white peers declined by 17%. The Emergency Task Force brought together a wide range of experts, doctors, psychologists, sociologists, and lawmakers to examine the root causes of this stark disparity and to come up with potential solutions. The product of our work was a bill, the Pursuing Equity in Mental Health Act, which would authorize nearly $1 billion in grants and other funding support to do research, recruit culturally competent care providers, create outreach programs to reduce stigma surrounding mental health, and establish training for providers to effectively manage the disparities. We have also made progress in the years since the task force was convened, and most notably was the creation of the 988 hotline, which anyone watching this video can call or text 24/7, and to talk to a real person and have a judgment-free conversation about what you're going through. There's much more we still must do at the institutional level to end the disparity in mental health that is impacting so many of our children. But in the meantime, we all have an individual responsibility to care for one another, to support our friends, to be there for someone you know who may be going through a tough time. Thank you to all of you gathered here for this briefing. Thank you to CEAT for putting this briefing together and raising the awareness around this important issue. May God bless you and the work that you will continue to do.
Well, thank you so much to our congressional partners for those important remarks. We're going to head into sort of a roundtable discussion panel kind of thing. Again, I'm not Ayan, I'm Joanna from the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. But I'm going to try to hand over the floor to our incredible speakers. We have some youth advocates here. We have some members of AFSP who have worked for equity and inclusion in mental health. So I am going to just introduce us real quick to Jasmine Wildcat at the end, Isabel Ohakama, and then Mary Lawal and Vic Armstrong from AFSP. And I'm going to turn it over to you all to sort of introduce yourselves, talk a little bit, please, about how you got involved in this advocacy, and what your background is. And you guys can start at the end if you want.
Jasmine Wildcat, Hello, everyone. My name is Jasmine Wildcat. I'm an enrolled member of the Northern Hoppo Tribe. I'm from the Wind River Reservation in Wyoming. I'm currently attending the University of Wyoming, triple majoring in psychology, Native American Indigenous studies, and political science. And my experience with mental health is just, personally have been diagnosed with anxiety and depression, and have just, even though I'm in my last semester, my senior year of college, I've been dealing with this since, like the beginning of high school. Not only has it impacted me and myself, but, my friends, my peers, my family. So mental health is just a very big part of my life, and it's something that I feel like definitely impactful for a lot of people.
Hi, everyone. I'm Isabel. I'm currently a second-year student at the University of Virginia. I'm double majoring in psychology and youth and social innovation with a concentration in policy and data analysis. I would say my mental health journey is deeply shaped by the intersections in my identity as a Black woman, a queer youth, a Nigerian immigrant. Growing up in Texas, there wasn't much conversation about mental health. And when we did have those conversations, the resources that were shared never seemed tailored towards me. It never seemed to fit the different intersections of my identity. And I feel like that's something that other young people who fit into different underrepresented groups can attest to as well. So this led me a couple years ago to start the Wellness Coalition, which allowed people in my community, young people in my community who came from underrepresented groups to come together and support one another and share resources that were not only accessible, but also culturally relevant. I didn't know this back then, but that was a prime example of the importance of peer support and the power of peer support and how it can uplift young people, specifically young people who typically come from underrepresented backgrounds and don't have access to your typical forms of mental health resources. My advocacy today focuses on using research and policy and data to uplift young people and also give them those resources in that space within mental health.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mary Lawal. I am a psych major at Prince George's Community College. So what led me to mental health advocacy? Growing up at a young age, struggling with my mental health wasn't really something that was spoken of. It wasn't really something that was talked about. And mental health was always considered a taboo. And so having to struggle for so many years and navigate my own mental health journey on my own, and just not really knowing how to get the help that I needed, I opened up to my parents about what I was going through, and seeing as, just coming from an African-American culture background, and there was a lot of stigma surrounding mental health, and my parents didn't really understand it and couldn't really like come to terms with the fact that I was struggling with my mental health. And so I had to advocate for myself to get the treatment that I needed in order to recover. So it clicked that so many other youths like myself who aren't able to get the help that they needed due to stigma and due to just the lack of education surrounding mental health. And so this is what led me to having this burning passion to share my story, to talk about mental health and let other people know that help is available if they're struggling with their mental health, that mental health isn't something that they need to shy away from, but they don't have to be alone in their pain. I share my story because I want people to know that there is hope available. There is resources, there is help if you need to talk to someone. So I share my story to let others know that I am a living proof that mental health does not discriminate. Mental health doesn't have to be a death sentence. We can all talk about it. We can all feel like we can put our trust and our hope in each other by leaning in each other's arms and just sharing and making mental health an open topic for everyone to feel seen and heard, because that was something I struggled with for a really long time. I didn't feel heard. I didn't feel heard. I didn't feel seen. And so just talking about mental health just helps other people like myself just feel less alone.
Good morning, and thank you all for being a part of this conversation. My name is Vic Armstrong. I'm Vice President for Health Equity and Engagement with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. And I have been working in mental health for a long time, longer than most of you have been on this earth. I've been in this work for about 30 years. And my work in this space has really been a bit of an evolution, but I think it all really stems from me growing up in rural North Carolina, son of a preacher, in a very, very poor area of North Carolina, and never really hearing about mental health or suicide prevention, suicide awareness. And so it created a narrative for me and for my community. There was a misinformed narrative. The narrative was that mental health was something you didn't talk about out loud, that it impacted other communities, and that it was actually the result of moral failure or spiritual weakness. And that was a narrative that I carried with me. But I also, in reflecting on that, recognized that there was also no narrative coming from outside my community that was correcting that narrative. No one was reaching into my rural Black community and saying to us, no, this is about you. You do need to be concerned about mental health. We do have resources that speak to who you are and speak to your experience. I didn't have that. And so I watched a lot of people struggle. And now as a parent, a father of 3 young Black boys, I recognize the importance of them being able to find their place in this conversation. I recognize the importance of them needing to have the ability to say, you know what, I'm not okay today. They need to feel like they can have conversations that are non-judgmental and that we can create safe space, not brave space, but safe space. And so that's why this conversation is so important to me. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Those are some excellent backgrounds, really interesting and personal stories. So thank you for sharing. I think I'm going to direct the next question to our youth advocates. If you could all speak a little bit about the current challenges that minority youth face today when it comes to mental health in your experiences. A few of you have mentioned already stigma, lack of just knowing where to go. If you could just speak a little bit to that, you can, draw from your own experiences or share stories that you've heard. I think that would be really helpful in giving us some context. And whoever wants to start can start.
I would say the biggest thing, and I mentioned this a little bit when I introduced myself, it's limited peer support with young people who come from underrepresented communities. A lot of times, being able to access your traditional forms of like mental health resources, it's not accessible to those young people. It's not created to meet their specific needs and their specific diverse experiences. And so that's where peer support comes in. They're able to connect with people who not only one are typically around the same age as them, but also come from similar backgrounds as them. And seeing that as I mean, I've been affected by peer support, and being able to connect to someone that was from a similar culture or similar community has made me feel less alone, and also made me understand that like if they were able to get through it, so was I. So I think we definitely need more funding to go into research that kind of supports the impact of peer support for underrepresented groups.
I think for the challenges that I can speak on for Indigenous youth, at least, I mean, I can't speak for everyone, but at least the stuff that I've seen back home and on my reservation is coming from a place that is pretty rural, and especially there's not very many resources available for Indigenous youth, and I've tried to use said limited resources, and it hasn't really been as successful as you would hope. Because among Native youth, I think suicide is the second leading cause of death, and it's 2.5 times more than the national average. So I think we're among Native youth. I think the you're sort of expected to be resilient, coming from all this intergenerational trauma. It's not really understood, that concept. So I think just what we're seeing here is that we're not being treated accordingly, and we're not being very understood. So I think just the sense of understanding is something that needs to be sort of put forward. Even if we don't really understand it as well, because there's not very much research. I think just being willing to listen to concerns, or just being open to have a conversation, because I think having conversations decreases stigma. It's just as easy as that. So yeah, at least it's what I'm seeing.
And Isabel, if you don't mind, would you be able to share a little bit about what peer support would look like for youth? I think a lot of us are familiar with peer support models in general, but there's tends to be some confusion about what that would look like for, people who are under 18, for example, or just early adulthood.
Yeah, I can speak on that a little bit. So I mentioned earlier, I started the Wellness Coalition, which was an example of peer support, which I didn't know back then. And with peer support, and based on my experience, I think one is really equipping young people who are peer support providers with the resources that they need, and also acknowledging that they're also young people as well. And I think that intergenerational collaboration is really important when it comes to peer support and it being successful. I feel like when we talk about youth peer support, it's kind of seen as like a young person's problem, but having the support from adults to help train those peer health educators or peer health support providers is really important. Having adults to kind of help support them as well, because they're also young people, is extremely important. And also just having peer support programs in ways that are accessible to young people. So something that is great to have is like collaborating with already pre-established community organizations that like young people already trust and lean on when implementing peer support programs. So that can be like faith-based programs, it can be mentorship programs that already exist in that community. That can be a great way to kind of implement peer support programs in a way that is like more cohesive and allows young people to really like rely on those resources.
If I could
Yeah.
add, I think one of the things that is key to this is that for anyone, when you're going through a challenging situation, when we talk about the challenges that face minority youth and the importance of peers, when anyone's going through a challenging situation, when you find yourself at a point of crisis, or you find yourself at a point where you don't know where to turn, what you want most is safety. You want connection and you want trust. And you're more likely to trust someone who understands what you're going through, who's been where you've been, who've experienced what you've experienced. And so I think a lot of our challenge is really figuring out, how do we incorporate more of the voices of young people in the work that we're doing, and how do we allow young people to lead and guide us, much like we've heard, I think, from these youth leaders today, that they have a lot to say about the needs of young people, the mental health needs of young people, and the things that we can do to address those needs. And I think that the importance of having peers in that space also allows you to account for some of the deficits that we have in our workforce that speak to historically marginalized communities.
I think one thing that I would like to say is the issue with lack of access to mental health care in the Black community. I know that from my experience in seeking therapy services and just like searching for a psychiatrist, and usually with the issue of insurance, having to look for a therapist or psychiatrist for weeks, searching and just calling, emailing different places, and for weeks on, just trying to get hold of someone that can, say, yes, I'm available to assist you. And just the issue of not really knowing how to get that support, because there's a lot of times where I've wanted to get therapy, but my insurance sadly doesn't accept a lot of therapists that look like me, that are in my age gap. So it leaves me with having to go to someone who's much older. And so I just believe that having access to a therapist that looks like you, who understands you, like all of us have said today, someone who really gets you is so important, because having to search for services for hours and hours and scrolling, calling, emailing different service providers it has been so excruciating, just not being able to find a provider that accepts your insurance, and not even being able to be in services to recover from what you're struggling is a big issue that we see today. There's a lot of people that will like to gain access to services, but they don't know how to, because there isn't any easy access to it. You have to search for hours, calling for days, emailing, and just to find out that only 2 providers get back to you saying, oh, we don't have any other openings for you, for any clients right now, or I don't accept your insurance. And that's an issue, because if you're not able to access the help that you need, then where do we turn to?
Right.
Are we supposed to be calling the 988 crisis hotline every single time? We need therapy services that we can be able to access, that we can follow up with, because a lot of the times when we call the crisis hotline and it's not a crisis situation, yes, they stay on the phone with us, they talk to us, but we just need a therapy service that can actually help us further, that can put us through the skills, the coping mechanisms to help us work through what we're going through. So just having easy access to these services is super important.
I think so. I think that sort of speaks to a little bit of what Vic, you were saying about the workforce, making sure that we're expanding the workforce, supporting the workforce as well, and making sure that it's representative. So I think those are really key points. And Vic, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, and you sort of already have in terms of like rural mental health access, if you could talk about the disparities that lead to that difficulty in accessing care, the social determinants of health, whether or not that's, income, poverty, things like that.
Yeah, I think the first part of it, I think when you think about youth and you think about families and communities that are dealing with the impact of socioeconomic desperation or violence, any of that is going to impact the mental well-being of not just an individual, but also a community. And mental health challenges don't happen in a vacuum. If you experience mental health challenges, that impacts the health of a community. And so I think those are things that we have to think about, that we need to be able to reach people at an individual level. Part of the challenge with our mental health system today is that for decades, we have operated very much from a one-size-fits-all model. And it does not speak to the differences, the nuances of race and culture and ethnicity. It doesn't speak to oftentimes the lack of access to resources where people live, work, play, learn, and worship in rural communities. And so those disparities impact our mental well-being. I mentioned in my opening remarks that part of the challenge for me growing up was that there was no message coming from outside my community that was saying that this is about you. People in historically marginalized communities, whether they are youth or whether they are older individuals, oftentimes can't see themselves in the resources that we are producing. And when people can't see themselves in your resources, they're not going to turn to your resources when they're in their in that period of need. So one of the things that we have to think about in addressing those disparities is that we are actually dealing with a system that was based and built on inequity. So part of the challenge in creating more access to resources for historically marginalized communities, creating more access for youth of color, is thinking about the fact that those resources currently are things that have not existed in the past. And so we need to be leaning into communities, leaning on young people, and allowing them to guide us in how we do this. And I would say this also about the use of peers and about our workforce, is that one of the things I think that we have to do a better job of is looking into communities, and it's particularly in communities of color, and understanding how to develop tomorrow's workforce. Part of our challenge is that for a lot of young people, they're looking now at where they want to go in their careers, the things they want to do in their career. But if I look at your resources, if I look at your work, and I don't see myself in your work, it's very difficult for me to see myself in your workforce. And so I think in terms of how we create more resources, we need to think about people need to see themselves in the work that we're doing today if we want to build that workforce of tomorrow. And then the other thing I think is that if you were to look at any major college, if you went to University of Alabama or Georgia or Texas or Clemson, they know today who's in 8th grade that's going to be playing football for them 4 years from now. We have to figure out in healthcare and in mental health in particular, how do we look into Black and brown communities and find young people that want to go into this field, or have the ability to go into this field, and how do we cultivate and how do we nurture them so that cultural competency doesn't just become teaching people how to assimilate or teaching people how to act like or understand communities. Cultural competency becomes creating resources that are created for and by those communities.
And sort of to build off of that, a few of you are studying psychology, if I'm not mistaken. So what sort of led you to that, and how have you seen your universities, your colleges reach out to people in your communities to try to expand that workforce and expand that field of study? Or have you seen them do anything for that?
Jump in. We're all actually studying psychology.
Okay, yeah, that's what I
So,
thought.
yeah, it's a weird coincidence. I go to UVA, and I don't want to speak for all of UVA, but I'm currently part of a peer support program called Who's Connected, which essentially is a class that is open to, typically it's open to first years and transfer students, but now it's open to the entire student body. And it allows young people or students to come together and kind of support one another, connect with one another, learn how to be vulnerable with one another, things like that. And so this year I'm actually leading different not focus groups, but different Who's Connected groups. And I would say, looking back, and that's kind of what I mentioned earlier with the importance of intergenerational collaboration. Being trained to be a Who's Connected facilitator, I was like, ethnic and racial identity was like a big part of our training. And it was like really important that we're able to know how to identify that, how to navigate that. And not just for Black and brown students, but also to help white students know how to like navigate those conversations. Again, I can't speak for all of UVA, but I can speak for Who's Connected and like being a peer support specialist through that. And I would say we were it was like no choice. Like you have to be able to know how to navigate those conversations. You have to be able to know how to support Black and brown young people who have a different experience on campus. So I'll give them props for that.
That's good to hear. I guess I'll give you all one more last question, and then we're going to open it up for a Q&A. We do have QR codes in front of you, but we aren't going to use that form. Like I said, we're filling in for Ion, so we don't have access to certain things. I think we're just going to have everybody stand up and ask a question, if that's okay. But I think just to wrap us up, I'd love to hear if any of you all have faced cultural stigma, specifically what that feels like, what that looks like, how that's affected your ability to reach out for support, and what you would tell your past selves when reaching out for support, how to go about that and how to address that stigma.
So I have experienced stigma hugely, and as I talked briefly on my experience in my opening remark, just having faced stigma in my household, and just like having to explain to my parents that mental health is a real thing, and regardless of what you look like, regardless of your religious background, regardless of your cultural background, mental health does not discriminate. And mental health can affect anyone regardless of who they are, what they look like. And just having experience, like, because my family is from a faith-based family. And so that was the other stigma as well. And my parents just letting me know, like, why do you have to seek for treatment? And, you know, you're not trusting God enough to take care of this, and just letting them know that why can I not do both? Why can it not go hand in hand? Because mental health shouldn't be different than physical health. Mental health is something that we all have, and we can all be affected by mental in any form, like regardless of who you are. It could be work stress or school stress or anything can cause it. So I don't understand why it has to be stigmatized. And just telling them that this is a real thing, and showing them people who look like me, who have been through it and was also been able to recover, showing them people who look like me. So I think from what we've all said here today, it is super important to just being able to see someone who looks like you, who has gone through it, who has been through and is now thriving in society, because there's also the stigma that mental health is a death sentence. And I want people to know that mental health isn't a death sentence. You can still thrive in society. You can still be someone. You can still achieve your dreams, achieve your goals regardless, because there are a lot of celebrities who have mental health conditions who are still thriving, who are still being able to be what they want to be. They're able to achieve their dreams. So in the Black community, it's a thing where mental health is a taboo. Mental health is something that is very misunderstood, and just educating people on what the reality of mental health looks like, and showing them, you know, proof and stories of people who have healed, who have been able to recover. And I believe that my story is one of them. I believe that my story is a story that is a story of hope, a story that it gets better, that mental health, illness, it doesn't have to be the end, that life you can still go through it and still be able to flourish. You can still go through it and still be able to see the light in your pain, in your struggles. And it's all about building a community, building a safe space where we can feel seen, where the voices of Black youths are able to be put out there, are able to be heard, because that is something that we struggle with. Our voices are shunned, our voices are silenced. And we just want people I just want people to know that we don't have to be quiet. If you're struggling, if you're going through it, talk to someone, speak to someone. There is help. Someone will want to, there are people that will want to hear your story. And that is what I want. That is what I want from people that people that are struggling. I just want them to know that there is a community. There are people that look like them. And just forming that representation is super important.
Thank you, Mary. Isabel, do you want to answer that too?
Repeat the question, please.
It was about cultural stigma and whether or not you faced it, what that looks like, what barriers you've felt that other peers have when it comes to different cultural stigma within their communities, and how that affects being able to reach out.
I was recently having a conversation with a friend of mine, and we were talking about how many times, like when it comes to mental health, we put on the back burner because it's like I'm already navigating life as a Black woman. I'm navigating life as an immigrant. I'm navigating life as someone who's queer. Like, I just don't have the emotional strength to like handle my mental health as well. Like I have other things that like I need to like get through on a day-to-day basis. And my mental health is something for the most part I can hide. So I don't feel the need to always like address it. And it was weird having that conversation with her because that's so unfortunate. And I think it's really important that when we're thinking of mental health services, that we're thinking about meeting those communities where they're at, because many times they're not going to reach out to you. Many times because of stigma, because of the hundreds of other forms of discrimination that they endure, they're not actively seeking out resources for their mental health because they're just that's just not the top being like the top priority for them. So I'm going back to peer support, but or not just peer support, but also like early like intervention programs or prevention programs, going into these communities, meeting these like communities where they're at, going into like already like pre-existing community organizations, whether that's like mentorship organizations, faith-based organizations, and reaching out to queer youth, Black youth, youth of color, different demographics that typically aren't going to reach out for mental health support just because they either one can access it or they just don't think it's a priority because they have to deal with so many other things. Making sure that we're going into these communities and giving them the resources that they need that's also culturally relevant and accessible to them.
Thank you.
So for me in the cultural stigma, I guess it's kind of like a two thing, coming from an indigenous community, but also from Wyoming. So in the state of Wyoming, you're expected to be, cowboy tough and to like, cowboy up. That's been the mindset of, generations. And a lot of people still do believe that way. You got to just man up and just deal with it. You don't, you shouldn't talk about that. Like, no, don't, like, that's not a problem. Like, what are you talking about? And then for Indigenous youth, as I spoke to, or as I spoke on earlier, it's sort of the same thing. It's more of like a hush hush conversation topic. It's just, you don't, you hear about, a peer maybe, dying by suicide. But then it's kind of like, oh, you don't talk about it. Even going to high school, I've had throughout my 4 years, I had a couple of peers, take their own lives, and the school was like, no, we're not going to talk about it. We wanted to, leave a chair out for graduation, for the couple of people in my class, and they were like, no, like we're not going to talk about it still. You don't want to encourage anyone else. And I think that's just, the wrong mindset to have. And it's something that, growing up, it's always been pushed that you don't talk about it. So me coming forward was kind of a really big step for myself to get through. And I'm lucky now that, now that I'm in my last semester at college, that I think the topic or the conversation around mental health in the state of Wyoming is definitely changing. Um, Thankfully that we're having our governor is like, pushing more mental health services, which is really nice, which really needed. So that's just a little bit of the stigma that that I've been seeing and have gone through where I'm from.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. Vic, did you want to answer that
Yeah,
quickly and then we'll open it up
Yeah,
to
I
questions?
think that one of the things that's important, I think, to keep in mind when we talk about stigma, the stigma really is a narrative that's handed down to you by your community. And so in thinking about that, we also need to think about not just the how to address it, but kind of why the stigma exists. Stigma in a lot of communities has been a protective factor. I think as Jasmine talked about that cowboy tough narrative that she grew up around, and growing up as a Black male, I was taught that as a Black man, you don't show vulnerability. You don't talk about things that can expose you. As a Black man, you keep your head down, you keep your mouth closed, and that creates stigma because that was my narrative. So we didn't talk about mental health challenges. But if we want to change that, then we have to normalize the conversation. We need to begin to talk about it and make it okay for people to talk about it. And young people are uniquely positioned to make that change. My father is 80 years old. There are a lot of things that he is not going to change his thinking about. But for younger people, you all are at a place where you are much more receptive to this conversation. And you're at a place where you can create a new narrative, both for yourselves and for your children one day, and for the people that you will have influence over in your life for years and years to come. And so I think we need to keep in mind that as we think about stigma, stigma is, but stigma does not have to be. Stigma is something that we learned. Stigma is something that we can unlearn.
I think that's fantastic and great way to sort of round out this conversation. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Your advocacy and passion for these issues is just really apparent and really appreciated. So I guess we'll open it up to questions. I think if you just want to, raise your hand, shout it out. Feel free over there.
Could you repeat the first part of your question? Okay. Yeah, I think there are a couple of things I say about that. One is I think that we should probably think differently about how we introduce mental health because we're introducing mental health, mental well-being all the time. We just call it different things. I think one of the challenges, one of the things that we have not done a great job at in the past is we teach young people how to recognize emotions like, when you're happy, when you're sad, when you're angry. We don't teach them how to recognize when you feel vulnerable, when you feel lonely, and what do you do about that, and how do you talk about that, and how do you verbalize it, and how do you create space to do that? And the other thing I think is that we have to be intentional about really creating safe space for young people to have these conversations. And I mentioned earlier, it has to be safe space and not brave space. I think especially for youth of color and people of color in general, we've often brought them into spaces and said, "This is a safe space. Tell us what's going on with you. Tell us what you think. Tell us how you feel." But then there are repercussions for sharing that. That is not a safe space. You've asked folks to come and be brave and be vulnerable. But if there are repercussions, not even repercussions from the system, but repercussions from peers who have not been trained how to handle this information, I think that's one of the things we have to think about. So I think when we think about where do we start with young people, I think it is really in normalizing that conversation from a very early age about being able to identify what's going on with you and being able to trust that when you go to an adult or to a peer, that they're going to listen to you non-judgmentally and they're going to acknowledge your feelings and that your feelings are going to be okay. So I think that's where we have to start. And I think there is no age limit on when you can start that and teaching young people how to identify their feelings and talk about them. In terms of Black males, I do see a shift, and I think a lot of it has come from athletes, entertainers being more willing to talk about their mental health challenges. We've done at AFSP, we've reached out to different organizations, we've reached out to different celebrities and had them as spokespersons. One of the most effective campaigns we've had, this was not a Black male, but a Black female. We had a campaign with Megan Thee Stallion in collaboration with the JED Foundation and the Ad Council. It was one of the most effective campaigns that we've had because young Black and brown people identified with Megan, and because she was someone who was known for being very open and honest and talking about her own challenges. And I think the more that we can have people of color having those conversations and demonstrating that you can have these conversations, you can have these conversations openly. I think that's where we are starting to see a change and where we need to continue to move in that direction. Thank you for the question.
Sorry, I just wanted to piggyback off what Victor said. I wanted to talk a little bit about my experience. So I did talk a little about it before, but growing up in school, mental health wasn't really spoken about, like I said, and no one was really talking about mental health, especially in schools. There wasn't any I didn't believe there was any counselors. There was just guidance counselors who really focused on academics and making sure we were getting out of trouble. We're staying out of trouble. So there wasn't really any psychologists that were really, talking about mental health, or we didn't really have any seminars or anything. And so I didn't really know how to how to put into words what I was experiencing. And this is the experience for a lot of youths, a lot of young people who don't know how to express what they're feeling. They don't know how to put it into words. And so they just think it's normal, or not normal, I shouldn't use the word normal, but they just think that that's how they should, that's not usual casual feelings. Sorry, I don't know the word. But basically they don't know how to say it. They don't know how to say, this is what I'm going through and I need help. I think early intervention is super important because if I was able to get the help that I needed on time, I probably wouldn't have gone through a lot of the things I struggle with. So catching it early is super important. Catching it early and making sure that they're able to access the help and they're able to know when to say, okay, I feel like this type of treatment isn't working for me. This type of treatment, I would think that I would have to try something else that works for me. And so being able to know how to address what they're feeling and how to ask for help, how to go back for help when it's not working is so important.
Thank you for that. I think we have time for one more question. There was somebody in the back who had raised their hand earlier. Yes, in the blue shirt.
Like I just said, early intervention is important. So making sure you get the help that you need on time. Don't wait. Don't wait until you're in a crisis situation before you reach out for that help. Make sure that you get the help that you need, that you speak to someone. I know reaching out for help can be scary sometimes, but just know that you're not alone. Know that you are not alone in your pain and that there are a lot of people like you who might be going through similar struggles as you, and just opening up to someone that you trust, opening up to a friend, a loved one, and just finding your support system. Find those people that can walk you through your journey. Find those people that can assist you, that can let you know that it's okay, that it's okay to feel the way that you do, because there are other people that feel that way too. And so you don't have to be alone in your pain.
Jasmine and Isabel, if you want to answer that, and then we'll wrap it up with some remarks from our final Congresswoman.
I think a quote, and this is I'm sure you guys have heard of this before. It's like, you can't pour from an empty cup. And I think that's something that I mean, I live by that quote, because although I've been on my mental health journey for a long time, there are phases in my life where I'm like, I don't put my mental health first. You know, I'm prioritizing school, prioritizing different commitments, or just different areas or aspects of my life. And it's really important to let young people, or always remind young people, that you truly, like, you can't pour from an empty cup. Like, if you continue to not prioritize your mental health, you're essentially, like, you're gonna experience burnout, most likely, which is something I've experienced so many times, because I have, like, repeatedly put my mental health on a back burner. And so I think just reminding them that their mental health is a part of their health. And it's like, if you have a broken leg, you're not going to go to the hospital and get like a cast on it. So for that same reason, like, you shouldn't not prioritize your mental health and wellness, and just, you know, obviously always providing safe spaces for them to be able to share any of their struggles with you.
Yeah, I definitely don't want to take up too much more time, but I agree with everything that Isabel said. It's just starting these conversations, just having them in general, and they don't have to be like super intense, but I mean, even just, you know, checking in, like, hey, how was your day, or how are you feeling? I think that is also just a very important way to sort of just start out. Yeah, I guess that's pretty much it.
Just real quick, just remember, everyone's mental health journey is different. So everyone's journey is their own journey. Start where you are, assess what's going on with you, reach out if you need help. But above everything else, always know that whatever's going on with you, there's nothing wrong with you. If you need support, everyone needs support sometimes, but don't feel like your journey has to be the same as anyone else's.
I think that's a great note to end on. You all have QR codes in front of you. One of them has a link to a list of legislation that we would love to get your boss's support on. Some have mentioned already the Pursuing Equity and Mental Health Act. There's also the Mental Health for Latinos Act and the Latino Youth Mental Health Empowerment Act. Those are some key bills that we would love to have your support on. And before we go, I'm just going to turn it over to a recording with some remarks from Representative Judy Chu of California, who is chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus. We're really grateful to all of our partners today and want to end on that note, and then let you all get back to your days. And thank you so much for taking the time out of them to learn from our very, very powerful youth mental health advocates.
Congressmember Judy Chu from California's 28th District and chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, or what we call CAPAC. I want to start by thanking CEAT, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention and Mental Health America, for gathering us here today and the young leaders who are here bringing attention to minority youth mental health. It's an honor for CAPAC to join our Tri-Caucus colleagues as honorary co-hosts for this briefing, especially ahead of National Mental Illness Awareness Week next week. As both the only psychologist currently serving in Congress and the first Chinese American woman ever elected to Congress, I can tell you that today's conversation is so critical. In the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander, or AANHPI community, mental health is too often a taboo topic of discussion for the young and middle-aged as well as our elders. And our community faces unique barriers when it comes to mental health. In fact, AANHPIs have amongst the lowest rates of utilization of mental health services, with nearly 64% of more than 2.5 million AANHPIs who meet the criteria for a mental health problem not receiving treatment. Many systemic barriers to accessing mental health care and quality treatment, such as the disparity between the high demand and poor availability of linguistically or culturally appropriate mental health service providers, further contribute to this problem. And in recent years, AANHPI youth ages 10 to 24 years old in the US were the only racial or ethnic population in this age category whose leading cause of death was suicide. That is why now, more than ever, we must reduce the stigma and increase access to care around mental health for the AANHPI community. That is why earlier this year, I was proud to join CAPAC executive member, Senator Mazie Hirono, in reintroducing the bicameral resolution recognizing May 10th, 2024 as AANHPI Mental Health Day. That is also why since 2016, I have introduced the Stop Mental Health Stigma in Our Communities Act, which addresses the root problems by providing community-based organizations with the resources they need to address mental health stigma and meet the direct service needs of the AANHPI community. But we have even more work to do, which is why I am so heartened by all of you here today. As young advocates and policy leaders, you all play such essential roles in addressing the inequities that young AANHPIs and all young people of color face in our mental health system. And we must keep working together so that no one falls through the cracks of our system because of their income, age, race, or ethnicity. So thank you again to CEAT, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and Mental Health America for gathering us here today to discuss this critical issue. I look forward to our continued partnership together.